Hello, everyone. Welcome to the No Zoo Lions podcast. This is episode 15. I'm Ari. I'm joined by my great friend Chad. And today we are going to be tackling the topic of use of force models slash continuums, how it differs between the United States and Canada, and probably more importantly, talking about articulation when we get into a physical confrontation. So, welcome, Chad.
Hey, how are you, Ari?
I'm
So yeah,
great.
I'm really interested in hearing you guys' perspective, and also I know there's a lot of similarity as well. And so this one will be kind of on the backside for our guys and gals out there who either are active officers and they're going to use force in the field, or they're trainers, or they're evaluators of use of force. So I know currently you're in a patrol setting, and so you're still out there putting hands on people using force, having to document that when necessary or when appropriate. And then um, I still have some ability to do that, limited. Mine is more um, reviewing use of force events at my agency, and then being with the officers who are using force to document that and also look at the use of force in relation to our policies and procedures and our training, and also case law that's relevant in the US. Now, for our landmark use of force cases in the US, it comes from our Supreme Court. In Canada, where does your landmark, your overlying national case law come from?
It's the same thing. Our Supreme Court as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then our landmark case, Graham v. Connor, is our most relevant case. There are multiple cases under that. Do you guys have like a landmark case that you
Yeah,
guys?
we have several. They're constantly being challenged, obviously, and they go up to the Supreme Court and things like that. So, um, just like in the States, it's funny you had mentioned. I think there's more similarities between Canada and the United States when it comes to police officer use of
So
force
do
than
I.
there are differences. I think we're going to be pretty much on the same page. We might have some variations, but I'm curious.
Yeah. So starting out with us, our landmark cases, all of them, basically define and outline a few things. Number one is, and this is another reason that, man, this stuff should be affecting your training. This is also why having someone create LEO curriculum that's an actual law enforcement officer can be very, very important, because all the cases attempt to focus not, there are no cases in the US that say this system's good, this system's good, this trainer's good, this trainer's not good, this technique is good, this technique is bad. What they define is a reasonable standard.
Hmm.
And the way we do it in the States is that we say a reasonable standard from a police officer's point of view. And from a police officer, it further gets defined in Graham, and it also gets reinforced in other case law. But in Graham, it talks about that reasonable standard, and it says a similar officer, meaning tenure, experience, in a similar circumstance at a similar time, with similar things they knew at the time that they
Hmm.
actually deploy the force, with similar training, um, would make a similar force option decision.
Right.
That's the reasonable factor. And it's the reasonableness of a police officer, not a reasonable person. And that gets wildly misunderstood even within policing south here in the States. Is a lot of even officers will say, well, it's a reasonable person standard. It's not.
Right.
It's a reasonable police officer standard. Ari, why would the court make that distinction? Why do you think?
Because of the lack of experience from a civilian knowing what we do. So their threshold and their perception is much different than what we encounter on a daily basis.
There's no doubt at all. I recently did an Instagram post, uh um reposted Roland Fryer, who was a Harvard professor and
Okay.
economist, who wrote, he actually says, coming into it in the early 1990s, he says, I was very anti-police. Now, I was very anti-police in the enforcement they were doing in the States. And I felt like they were racist in their applications of force. And
Hmm.
I felt like certainly their shootings were racial. And He's then you see 2014 to 2016 or 17 in the States, we had several instances that the media really took a hold of.
Hmm.
Tanner Rice, Eric Garner. There were several of these events. Philandro Castile up in Minnesota. There were several events where officers got involved in officer involved shootings under different circumstances, but all of them got publicized like crazy. And he says, so I decided I needed to do this paper, and it took him well over a year. He did a few ride-alongs, and then he does this interview where he says, I do this extensive work that takes me over a year, uh, close to 60 pages with notations, documentation on where he's getting his stats. And he's getting his stats from verified statistical places on cop applications of force and use of force from everyday low level force to lethal force. And what he finds is that on the lower levels, um, he does find what he considers some bias or some misrepresentation, numbers wise, overrepresentation of minority communities in simple uses of force. And he has about seven he looks at. Do they grab the guy? Do they push him up against a wall? Do they search him? Do they throw him on the ground? Do they handcuff him? The seventh metric he's measuring on non-lethal was, are they using intermediate tools on him?
Mm.
And he believes through his research that he finds a overrepresentation of minority folks in those lower levels of force. But he says, shockingly, I did not find any racial bias at all, and in fact found the opposite on officer involved shootings. In fact, it seemed in his paper that officers would hesitate sometimes versus when they would shoot white people, quite frankly. And so he does all this work and he says, man, I was wrong. He did a few ride-alongs and he mentions that in this video.
Hmm.
And he says the ride-alongs gave him context. He saw a side of policing he had never seen before when he rode along with these guys. And he did his ride-alongs in Baltimore, which would be very, very active here in the States. And then he does this paper and he says, you know what? I don't think there is a lot of racism in application of force and certainly not lethal force. In fact, in lethal force, he says, I don't believe there's any, which
Mm.
shocked him. He gets those, he analyzes the data, he gives it to a team. They verify what he thinks he's reading. He then fires them because he goes, I think we're all wrong. And he hires a second team and has them look at it. And they all say, no, no, you're right. And so at that point, he publishes it. He says within 4 hours, he's getting messages on people just ripping him up. Within 4 minutes, excuse me,
Yeah.
4 minutes, he's getting emails and messages. You piece of crap. Your thing is biased, horrible, horrible research paper. And he's like, it's 4 minutes. There's no way they read it and checked my citations.
Yeah.
So I put this up and people just went. There were a lot of people who had positive comments. There were some people who had crazy comments the other way, like ultra conservative comments. Oh, look, it's just minority people complaining. That is not what this post's about at all.
Hmm.
You're not even listening to him. But there were some comments on that were very, very interesting about police use of force that people were immediately dismissing, saying, well, he went on ride-alongs, so he got indoctrinated. How can you do ride-alongs and then write a paper on use of force? And it's like, are you that dense? He notes thousands of police use. Do you think he saw thousands of police uses of force? And these people would probably say, yeah, I think he did, not knowing there's very few police uses of force. One guy even says, you're you this guy's papers from 2019 when they weren't even keeping stats, or yeah, 2009, excuse me,
Right.
2000 or 1991, excuse me, 1991, when they weren't keeping stats. And this commenter goes, his first two lines of the paper are he saw a lot of excessive force against brown and Hispanic suspects, and you're just totally denying this. And I write him back and I go, did you read the paper? Because he literally lists events that happened in 2014 and 2016. There's
Yeah.
no way he wrote it in 1991.
Yeah.
Secondly, he says excessive force. He actually says he didn't find any excessive force, and then the guy stopped commenting because I actually posted it what he said. So even today, among non-law enforcement, there's this idea of police use of force, and I believe that's why the courts are like, hey man, it's got to be a reasonable officer standard, and even that reasonable officer standard can change from a 1 day officer to a 12-year officer or a SWAT officer, right? So all this stuff goes into context. In Canada, do they have, how do you guys figure the standard for a reasonable use of force?
Well, it's based on Supreme Court decisions, and it's also based on policy and national policy or provincial policies. There's actually, we kind of have two. We have one for municipal, which is our use of force model. And then we have the RCMP, which is the federal agency that goes across Canada. And they have a very similar thing, and it's called the IMIM, which is the Incident Management Intervention Model. That's what they call it. But it's very, very similar. Now, I actually just want to touch base, just go back on that post that you had put up. So I just looked at it. You have 12,000 views on that, and you have 6,000 shares. So that one went viral on your particular Instagram, which basically points out to me that we could put videos up of techniques and we get, we get some traction on it. But this is a hot topic. You're going to get officers and non-officers alike that just dig into this. What is happening with use of force? Why do cops do what they do? This is one of the hottest topics, I think, in policing that we don't really talk about enough. And I think that's why you and I are doing this now, because people want to know, why is violence happening in this profession?
Yeah.
And we obviously have a perspective that other people don't because we do the job. And like I said, I think it's an important topic. So, having said all that, in the States, is there a national model that you use, or is it departmental, statewide, or federal? How does it work for you guys?
So back to your point, kind of similar to Canada. So our federal agencies like the FBI or the DEA or the Marshal Service, they will have their use of force model, and that is specific to their service, right? It's going to be similar. Everyone pretty much bases their stuff on Graham, but it's interesting to me as a guy who travels around and coaches and teaches or who consults on use of force a lot. Even within our own industry, people don't even understand Graham and
Mhm.
what it says, and it's not hard to understand. Um, Either they've had an academy class and they've never researched it on their own, or they just haven't done any extensive research. There are a lot of people who are really, excuse me, squared away on it, but
Yeah.
Um, so you go federal, then you go your state agencies, and those agencies are going to have their own, and then your municipalities or your cities and your counties are going to have their own. So everyone's going to have their own model. Now, this has been an interesting challenge for me being a training provider.
Mm.
I used to, when I first started in '06 to about 2010, I had a written curriculum and I had it written up a certain way, and I would say, this is what it should say in your DT model or in your DT manual, your training, your policies, procedures. And I would give verbiage based on what C4C PJJ thinks on our interpretations and stuff. And we have reasons we use the language we use. But what I found is departments would send me the officers to train, and then it was like an act of Congress to get them to change anything in their use of force model, or any wording on how are we going to apply Graham to our current DT systems. So I moved to more of a, hey, your curriculum should have this stuff in it, and how you word it is up to you. Now,
Mm.
what's interesting is since I started doing that, now departments want me to actually write it out. And it's like when I used to write it out, you used to argue with me. And now it's like, hey, can you write this more completely? And so I end up doing consulting with departments after certification courses sometimes to assist in that. But really, my goal is to get their personnel up to speed on how they want to mold their policy, their training. Ultimately, what are they going to put in black and white on
Right.
paper? And then what are they going to train their cops? to your point, it does vary from department to department, and at times they don't even put in the Supreme Court case law, which I think it has to be in there. It has to be in there. But there are times where I find departments that don't even have that.
Yeah, and I find that a lot of officers don't. I mean, no one really likes to read legalese, let's be honest.
Yes.
But I mean, knowing some landmark cases. So in Canada, we have two big ones. So you've got what's it, Graham versus Connor down there?
Yes, sir.
So up here we have a case called Fleming versus Ontario, and then the other one that we have is Nassau-Gallup or R versus Nassau-Gallup, which is basically the Crown or the country versus that. So these are kind of two landmark Supreme Court cases that we have that are outlined for excessive use of force and use of force within Canada. And there's a lot that you can glean from those cases because God forbid, it might land on you one day. So you better know how things kind of roll out. Another thing that you've pointed out, if you are a provider or a trainer like C4C and you go around, it's also good to even maybe browse. So if you are teaching a federal agency, it's probably pretty smart to have an idea of what they're dealing with because
Yes.
you could be held liable, Chad, if you teach something which is not in their model and that type of thing. So, education for use of force trainers is also knowing the law and these cases. It's not just hands-on. It absolutely isn't.
100%. And so one of the ways we've even tackled that is if I'm going to an area, um, for example, in January, I'll go to Prince Edward Island in Canada, way as far away from you as I could get, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Further than I am right now from you. I believe if I'm in Prince Edward, I'm
Yeah,
further
you're on
than,
the other side of the country. But
yeah,
having said that, we're bringing you over to my side.
can't wait.
Yeah.
But so I'm going to be doing a course there. One of the things I always do is we develop over time assets in the different countries and in the different regions that we serve, and even down to different states or municipalities.
Mhm.
So I have a guy from Prince Edward Island who actually is an adjunct instructor for us, who works at the police academy there. That's his full-time law enforcement job, and he coaches recruits. So he'll be in the room for all 4 days of that class. And the benefit of that is if I get a specific legal question on use of force and application of whatever it is we're doing in the room, I'll defer to that
Mhm.
person
Yeah.
for for Canada, and I'll let him speak. And especially in that region, this guy's in the academy. He's teaching recruits. Part of his job is going to be fielding those requests or those questions. And we have a network both through Invictus and through C4C PJJ. We've got a national network where throughout North America, throughout many parts of the world, not just
Mhm.
North America, where we can turn to an Invictus or a PJJ guy or gal. We can make sure that they're present at training. And that is something I attempt to do. Now, we're not always, uh, we might be going into a new area, a new place. So when that happens, what I do is I refer them back to, I say, well, nationally, this is a standard because I know the national standards. And I go, your department could be more restrictive than this, but it can't be less. It can't do away with the standard. This is a minimum standard. Now it is your job to research for your department's use of force and your department's policies and procedures on how this is going to fit in with what we're doing in the room. And I always put it right back, frankly, to them because that's where it belongs. They're going to be the one on scene that night making a force option decision.
Yeah.
They need to be comfortable. And you mentioned earlier, it's going to fall on you. When I first started as a copper, I learned my academy stuff. Um, some of the legal was challenging to be engaged in when you had never used force. There's another reason law enforcement trainers who both train, coach, and apply force are the best for law enforcement systems, in my opinion. Because even as a recruit hired by a department and in my initial training, they taught me use of force. Even in that setting, I didn't understand it till I got out in the field. Some of it for sure, but the actual application and then documentation of force, that took me doing it in the field and then happened to write reports. The first agency I worked for, one of the common tactics of bad guys in that area was to sue the police. And I got sued repeatedly. And the first time I got on, I wasn't even nervous necessarily. I mean, I was nervous of the unknown when I went to test, when I actually had to get on the stand and my use of force got challenged
Mm,
in a court setting the first time. I was nervous about what are they going to ask me. I should have been scared to death because uh, what I thought might be bad, it was way worse. I knew I'd done okay and I knew I hadn't violated the law and I wasn't in trouble with my department.
hmm.
And this attorney twisted me around and he made me look stupid and he made
Yeah.
me look completely unreasonable. And it was a civil situation, but he embarrassed me. And then other senior guys who had a good grasp on the material were able to rescue it on the back end, but they filleted me and did so publicly.
Hmm.
And I said to myself, that will never happen again. And so I started studying. I didn't even know, um, at that time they called our force continuum. I didn't even know our force continuum
Yeah.
once I got on the stand. And then I was like, hey, I'd like to refer to it. And the attorney was like, oh, you don't know it? You don't know it? So how did you know it on the day you ran into my client?
Yeah.
How do you know you were within compliance? Well, I know I was in compliance. Tell me how. Well, I'm going to need to refer to it. So you don't know it. And it just, I mean, I just looked so stupid.
So
And so I made sure.
it's amazing you say that. So I am part of our use of force cadre, and this is not to throw anyone under the bus, of course. But usually before we get into scenarios or actual use of force things, Chad, we ask questions like very simple things. It's like, what is the threshold to end up using a CEW on a suspect? And there's silence that goes across the crowd. There's lots of people who know, but there's lots of people that are like, and they have to think about it. So it's important that you know those thresholds. You know your policy and you know when you can use your tools and when you can do certain things. Because the hesitation in the field is the stuff that's going to get you killed or sued or something to that effect. So education is massive. So that brings us kind of to the models themselves. If you don't know the models and if you don't know what an intermediate weapon is, if you don't know what grievous bodily harm is and the thresholds for that, then you're in trouble. So it is your job as a police officer to study that and know it without referencing it, so you know when it comes down the pipeline that you can deal with it. So having said that, in your state and in your department, do you have a particular model that you're using? And let's hear it. I'm gonna assume that it's gonna be really close to ours. So go ahead. What do you guys have?
So we have a model that what it does is it lists suspect behavior or resistance levels. And it categorizes them, and I'll go over that in a second. And then based on the subject behavior or resistance, it lists officer's response or use of force. And so it's going to be probably very similar to yours. And so
Yeah.
you have compliant, you have we call it passively resisting, but some places will call it active here in the States. And a passive resistant person is or not active, excuse me, active's next.
Yeah.
A passive resistant person is someone who will just sit and be dead weight or they'll
Mhm.
wrap their arms around an object. So we have cooperative, passive, we have obstructive. A lot of agencies down in America will call that active resistance. We make a delineation at my agency, and I'll get to why in a second. But
Okay.
obstructive resistance is I'm obstructing your ability to put handcuffs on me, but I'm not trying to harm you. So that could be me fleeing on foot. That could be me pushing your hands off. That
Mhm.
could be me breaking grips, but trying to move away, not moving in or throwing a punch off the grip break or grabbing my own grips.
Yeah.
So I'm obstructing your ability to control and handcuff me in
Yeah.
essence. Arms are just being held underneath my body. Takedown was successful. I stuck my arms in. I'm not hollowing out my hips and digging for something in my waistband. I'm not trying to grab digits on the cop or bite them. I'm just pulling my arms in, right? We're standing, you put me on a wall in a 2-on-1 team tactic and I suck my arms in or I don't want to put them behind my back.
Hmm.
That's our obstructive resistant individual. And um, then we have our aggressive resistant individual, and many people will call the obstructive person active, but in the States, when you go to court, when someone is actively resisting, many times the court means someone who is at an aggressive resistant level. And for us, aggressive resistance means non-lethal resistance, but designed to cause harm. So takedowns to top position,
Hmm.
punches, um, generally non-lethal stuff. No weapon system involved. He is that suspect, male or female, is now fighting us. They're not just trying to not go into cuffs. They're fighting. So that's our aggressive
Hmm.
assailant. And then we have life-threatening resistance, which is typically in the States, they've armed themselves, they're running you over with a vehicle, they've armed themselves with weapon systems, if they're empty-handed, they're choking you from a good position, they're battering you so badly you're going to go unconscious. Um, they're unarmed but trying to get your weapon system. All these are people that we would put in that life-threatening resistance. Now, going back to our model, so I've got a compliant person. Well, the officer's force levels are going to be appearance and just verbal commands.
Hmm.
We that is not reportable force, but we consider any time you begin to interact with the public a use of force. In For our department, that is not always true in the States. So verbal commands, um, setting you up for handcuffing and just handcuffing you is low level control.
Hmm.
We use low level control on compliant, passively aggressive, resistant people or obstructively resistant. So we're going to get some kind of control and then cuff. Maybe we take the person to the ground, control them through segmenting team tactics. We do arm extractions, we cuff them.
Hmm.
That person is in obstructive resistance and we have to get them into custody, but we are not using anything that is designed to cause harm or likely to cause harm. Now we move on to that aggressive resistant person who's showing an intent to do harm and trying to harm the officers. That's our intermediate force here in the States, is what
Hmm.
they call that. Intermediate force is any of your low lethality design tools being utilized as a low lethality tool, because I could use some of those in a lethal application
Yep.
depending on what the bad guy's doing. So low lethality tools used in a low lethal manner are intermediate force and strikes, same. Depending on if you can do carotid restraint or not. At times, some agencies have carotid restraint in an intermediate force response. We did prior to them outlining it. Um, and then finally, you have deadly force. And deadly force reaction is anything that's likely to cause death or substantial bodily harm. And so, deadly force traditionally for us is going to be a projectile type weapon,
Hmm.
uh, um, even a beanbag to the head or to the face purposefully, not
Yep.
I getting an approved target and you duck to try to duck the round and it hits you in the face, but a purpose app. My baton, I'm striking the approved areas on the upper arm, and the person suddenly goes and starts to produce a knife, and now there's a knife in their hand, and I crack them in the head.
Hmm.
That's a lethal application of that non-lethal tool. So,
Hmm.
but typically in the States, your lethal applications are going to be firearms or knives.
Hmm.
That's our normal application. So the other thing that is consistent in our use of force model is a suspect could actually be in the elevated force resistance. So they could be aggressively resistant or life-threatening resistant, and they could not yet be showing an intent to do harm. And so we could use lower levels of control to de-escalate their behavior, get them to disarm, and come to um, applic a successful custody without even using any real force other than low level force. An example of that would be the person who's holding themselves at gunpoint. I want to kill myself. They're out in an open area. There are other people around. They are life threatening resistance because they're armed and they won't disarm, but they are not showing an intent to do harm. So that allows us to use lower levels of force to intervene, gain compliance. They put the gun down, they prone out, they move away from the gun, they prone out. We're able to take them into custody and get them help, as opposed to they take the gun from here to here and now we have to deliver force. So
Mm.
for us in the States, one thing well, I shouldn't say all the departments have done this. Metro has done this, and I think it's very, very good. Metro has made almost like a go button for use of force, and that's an articulable intent to cause harm.
Okay.
That that we always make sure in our guys' blue teams or use of force reports,
Yeah.
always make sure that they're clearly articulating and defining the intent to do harm prior to their actual application of force. I believe that that is a very good thing that Metro has added to their model. So they have the resistance level of the suspect, but they literally have a line and it says intent to do harm.
Yes.
And it reminds the officers, don't talk to me about him not cooperating, him being defiant, he won't follow verbal commands, he has a gun, and then I shot him. Well, that's not enough. That he
Hmm.
had a gun, he's non-cooperative, he won't follow verbal commands. I need you to define for me the intent to do harm that made you go from verbal commands to pulling triggers. So I actually believe Metro's model, um, which I was blessed to have a hand in, although I didn't necessarily come up with that verbiage.
Hmm.
When we talked about what it was that made our officers act, we all agreed it was that. And I think that that's a very good thing in our policy because our officers end up writing about the suspect's actions that showed an intent to do harm. And then that caused them to use whatever the force was.
Yeah, your model is almost exactly the same as ours, just some slight words differences. And it's interesting that you and I are using the term model. So some years back, they referred to it as a continuum in probably both countries. They've got away from that word because I think the general public, the continuum, they were thinking this, which is linear in its application. As we know, use of force is there's a continuous assessment that goes on, there's a continuous risk assessment that goes on. So it can change from going up here to down here. And that's really important for any officer when in a use of force, obviously. It's a nonlinear model. I mean, that's really what we have to talk about here because subject behavior can change, right? I can go from an active or assaultive all the way down to I'm cooperative and I'm done. I can't keep wailing on them. We know that. And so that's why we have to be adjusting.
Correct. And I had another event earlier in my career that I also got sued for.
Hmm.
Critical event where a woman had a knife and was coming after us, coming right after us with the knife. And what was interesting is at that time at the department I worked for, we did have a use of force continuum. And one of the things, and I was able to defend it,
Hmm.
but one of the attacks made on me in court were, can you explain the continuum? By this time, I've been sued a couple times and I could. So I started talking about our use of force continuum at that time. And then the attorney was like, well, do you have this tool on your belt? Do you have this tool? Yeah, I am. Are you certified? Yeah. If you had training, yeah. Um, well, it's my understanding that you have a continuum and that her attorney's position as she advanced on us was that I should have used pepper spray, baton. Um, I didn't have a taser because at the time we didn't all have tasers, but another person, we had one taser present at this call, and then we had a low lethality shotgun.
Yeah.
The taser never got deployed. I didn't have one. The low lethality shotgun got deployed and didn't necessarily stop her. She kept coming. Um, so the the grilling of me, but at this point I'd already been sued and I'd already been through this,
Hmm.
was the idea was the attorney's perspective was you have a continuum, you have to follow it. And I was like, absolutely not. Like I could go from arrival to, and the attorney also used as an attempt to indict my actions, even though it wasn't a criminal thing, it was a civil thing. They also used the relatively short time of us saying, hey, we'll be out with one to us saying, hey, we've had to use lethal force. And that time frame was very, very short.
Mhm.
And so they said, how could you have used all these other options? I said, well, none of them were reasonable. By that time, I knew Graham very well.
Mhm.
I said, it's not reasonable to ask me to apply pepper spray. Our effective pepper spray range was 3 to 5 feet.
Yeah.
Uh, this was outdoors. It was relatively poor weather, which could affect the effectiveness of pepper spray in and of itself. The taser that we did have, the effective range at that time was 7 to 12 feet,
Yep.
7 to 12 feet. And we had a about a 46% success rate, high 40s. If I remember right, it was like 46% success rate with tasings, and she was moving and closing. So the taser, even if I had one, I don't know that I would have used it. So it was a very interesting experience where I got to talk about that we don't, they call it a continuum.
Yes.
So then fast forward, um, I think that this happened repeatedly in the States and mainly in court. And I think that that's when departments started switching to a model,
Yeah.
which basically means, hey, bad guy's doing this. These are options. That's also misunderstood, though. I'll have sergeants, for example, that don't like the baton. They think it's a bad tool. They don't like baton applications of force. They think it causes more problems than it solves. So I get this supervisor for a copper who uses his baton, and now the supervisor doesn't want to bless the use of force, and he also wants to give the officer training.
Mm.
One of my jobs when I review these events is to see if the officer's within compliance of policy and use of force and case law and all that. And my job is to help the officer explain their perspective and their point of view and their application of force. And I'll say to the supervisor, well, what level of resistance is the suspect in? And then they'll say, well, they were um, assaultive. And I go, okay, well, are they showing intent to do harm? And he's like, well, yeah, at this time they are because they're doing X, Y, Z. I said, does my guy articulate that? Yeah, he does. And I go, so your only objection is you used a baton. Yeah, I don't think they work. They're a bad tool.
Hmm.
Doesn't matter. As long as it's a reasonable application of force and a reasonable decision made on the 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 actions of the suspect, the officer can choose baton even if you wouldn't. And I always tell a supervisor, if you wouldn't do that, that's cool, don't do it. But that doesn't keep him from choosing the baton. Now, maybe I don't mind training where you offer him other options in a similar circumstance. Then he gets training for more than one way to handle the problem. But if the training is going to say you shouldn't use a baton, like that's an opinion. Like that's not training and that's not policy and that's not case law.
Yeah.
Now, I personally, I've used my baton twice in my policing career. Both times I couldn't close it at the end, and both times it had limited initial success. And then as the fight wore on, it had more increasing success. But I could have attributed that to them gassing as well.
Hmm.
And I personally actually don't like it very much myself.
Hmm.
But that doesn't mean that I could tell another cop you can't use it. In in Canada, how do you guys break up? What low lethality tools are common for your officers, and what's the level of force for a low lethality tool called in Canada?
I mean, obviously the tools that we typically have, you have your OC spray, you have your CEW, and you have your baton, right?
Same as
Uh,
us then.
and so our policy at the station is that you have to have at least one less lethal on your belt. That is
Oh,
that's the policy. Now, there is also good practice, which basically goes, officer, I put to you that you did not have your baton on your belt, and this could have been an option during this physical encounter. Now you have to now explain to me why you didn't have that. You only used your taser, but you didn't even have this option. So there is unless you're very good at articulating, you can get fried on the stand for those things. Now, I realize that ounces make pounds, right? And so we have a lot of gear, and I'm not a baton fan. I've never used it. Um, and so it's not something that I like, but you have to be able to articulate, obviously. So,
Sure.
in Canada, you have your cooperative subject, you have your passive subject, you have your active resistant subject, you have your assaultive, and then you have your grievous bodily harm or death, right? So, sound
It's almost
familiar?
the same thing.
Yeah,
It's
it's the
almost
same.
the same thing.
And so in there, it's all
Do,
the same,
do
Chad. Like,
you guys allow strikes for, are
yes.
strikes intermediate force for you guys? They go right along with your low lethality tools?
Yeah, so we have an outlining thing where we have soft level and then something called hard level, right? So soft level could be grappling, bringing down to the ground, maybe a trip. Hard could be baton, elbows, punches, kicks, knees, that type of thing. So that's kind of how it's split on our model.
Okay. Do you guys in Canada, is there a push to make strikes to the head lethal force or not really?
We haven't had it because, to my knowledge, I haven't seen it, but it only takes one lawsuit where someone gets killed with an elbow or a punch, and now they're, changing it. If we look at the rear naked choke or the LNR, the VNR, whatever you want to refer to in your agency, that has gone from a tool that every cop was using 25 years ago at the bar to get a drunk person out to you can't use it or it has to be at the highest level of force, which is at our department at the moment.
Interesting. Now, I would almost agree with, because I do a reverse argument, because in the States there has been a push at times, and even within my own agency, we've had a couple of administrators who at times have brought this up.
Hmm.
And I handled this first at my own agency, and I've had to handle it at a couple others now. And they brought up that strikes to the head are lethal force. And then I said, okay, no problem. If you want me to push that out,
Hmm.
first off, that's not policy, so we're going to need a policy change. But training wise, what I will now train my cops in is if someone wants to punch you in the face, you can shoot them. And they're
Right.
like, oh, no, no, no,
Yeah.
no, you can't teach them that. And I go, well, hold on. You just said it's lethal force. Why can't I do it?
Hmm.
Now, choking someone, I can shoot that guy if he's choking me in the States. Someone applies a strangle to me, I could utilize deadly force to defend myself against that strangle. So the strangle thing in the States, I can't use the same argument necessarily. I can't say, hey, we're going to use it as low lethality, even though we are. And a bad guy is using it. I can, with reasonableness, go into court and say he's trying to render me unconscious, and that's not to help me. He's
Hmm.
going to try to kill me.
Yeah.
I used to be able to make the argument we're rendering him unconscious to cuff him and not harm him,
Yes.
and then put him into custody.
Hmm.
Um, so that one, my argument doesn't work on. But if you're working in an agency and you have administrators who begin to say that a common strike, I'll say common strike to the head, and that is a punch while both people are standing. If you're soccer kicking dudes on the ground, that's a problem. If you are stomping on dudes' heads, that's a problem.
Yeah.
If you are throwing a strike in the middle of a battle with a guy trying to harm you, and you're throwing an elbow or something in the clinch, that is not lethal force. If officers within the sound of our voices are fighting those fights in the States, I've had a ton of success of just saying, cool, let's be consistent. That dude balls up his fist, says, I'm going to punch you, we can shoot him.
Hmm.
And then every administrator goes, oh, no, 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 I'm not
Yeah.
saying that. And I'm like, cool, you're right. It's not lethal force.
Right.
It's not lethal force for anyone, though,
Right.
because you can't do it. You can't do it one way. Like in the States, when they start telling cops, carotid restraint is lethal force, well, that's what it is for the bad guy. So my argument wouldn't necessarily work,
Yeah.
even though we're not going to use it. For you and I, it's laughable that a carotid, what am I going to do? Hold it? So he goes unconscious. I'm like, oh, well, you chose lethal force, pal. Sorry. Go to the light.
Yeah.
Do not fight. You know,
Yeah.
we were never going to use a strangle as lethal force. But if there are officers out there, because I do consult on this south of the border, where guys will reach out to me and say, we're really having a problem with our administration.
Yeah.
If I can get them in a Zoom call or even go there and have a conversation, um, I'll do it respectfully, but I'll say, hey, when we use of force, we have to be reasonable and we have to be consistent. And we have to have clear boundaries for our officers if we want them to make good force option decisions. So from now on at this agency, anyone who wants to punch anyone that's lethal force, and we're going to start shooting people
Yeah.
who want to punch people. And they're like, or I come on a scene and a guy's punching another guy
Yeah.
and they go up and they're actively fighting. I can just draw out and be like, stop. And the guy who stops doesn't get shot. But the other guy, man, I need to shoot him because it's lethal force that he's using on the other guy. So I better shoot the guy punching the other guy. And they're like, oh, no, 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 we're not saying that. And I'll go, okay, I agree with you. We're not. So punching people is not lethal force. And they'll go, yeah, I guess it's not lethal force. I'm like, okay,
Okay,
cool.
so there's a caveat to that. So let's take the officer, which is 5'2", 115 pounds, and is going against the 200-pounder, who's the Golden Gloves champion, and she's articulating that, I'm going to be overpowered. I have to shoot them. So it's a model here that we have to look at. Generally speaking, I love what you're saying about that. It makes sense to me. But
So
there are,
in the states, they'll say, I have to have the things that either aggravate my level of force or mitigate it, bring it
yep.
down. Those things have to be known to me at the time I use force.
Mhm.
So if you have a huge size disparity, that is something that you could say, okay, well, now there's a lethal force problem. One we recently had in Vegas is where 3 to 4 subjects began to attack one officer, and all 3 to 4 were empty hand.
Mhm.
Well, that's multiple people swarming him. Well, that starts moving into deadly force
Yep.
because he has multiple adversaries. So that was an aggravator where, upon review of the event, there was some agreement that this could have turned into a lethal event pretty quickly. And that one is still going, so I can't talk about it. And the officer made some mistakes.
Yep.
Where some other things happened where it absolutely started turning into a lethal event.
Mhm.
But he never ended up using lethal force, which is fine. We were just reviewing it. But your point is exactly correct. The knowledge of the person's fighting ability has to be known prior to the use of force.
Yeah.
Here's where training helps us though. Can you detect knowledge of a person's trained behavior early on in a physical encounter with them?
Are you asking me personally?
Yes. Yes.
For me, yes.
And what are some of the things that what are some of the things you begin to know in your mind that tell you this is a trained individual?
I'll look at their stance, how their base is, if they're getting an angle on me, if I'm looking for those precursors of shedding, looking away, why are they looking at my tool belt? There's certain physical cues, even subtle cues that I am constantly looking at for them. I don't think if you don't train, you could miss a ton of these things.
Oh my goodness. Oh my, how about when you go hands on and you begin to feel trained behavior from your bad guy? And
100%
you know
kinetic.
it like that.
Yes,
You know it like
kinetically.
that.
Yes, kinetically, you can feel on how they're evading. I would agree with that. It's the unseen skill of a trained individual as an officer. It's amazing. I do this in jujitsu, Chad, where I will grapple with my eyes closed because now I'm trying to physically feel where they're moving. And it's the same thing when we're standing and I'm at work. It's I'm constantly reading through here, and through here.
And even as a bouncer, you were doing this probably ad nauseum as you escorted people out of a venue.
Mhm.
When I'm escorting someone, I'm already getting my reads and cues on whether they train.
Right.
And especially when they begin to resist. Are they just stiffening up? Are they just trying to pull their arm out of a grip? Or are they going and attacking the grip at the grip and rotating to the inside position and
Yeah.
then establishing their own grip or their own underhook? Is their head going from just kind of upright and in to turning back into me and they're establishing some kind of positioning with the head?
Yeah.
All these things are little things that you feel them switch into their stance. The way they grab you is different when they train. Everything is different, and immediately I can begin to get a read that I can articulate through years of application in the training room, and I can articulate. And I will even say what I've done. I used to say this indicated the person was trained in my use of force reports. And then I got sued and
Yeah.
we ended up in court. And my listeners are probably going, man, he gets sued a lot. Well, I've worked at agencies, big agencies, and I've used a lot of force, and it's just part of being here. Like
Yeah.
all of us have gotten sued, right? So I get sued. Um, and I say it indicated trained behavior. Well, the guy went to court and swore up and down he didn't have training. And so then on the stand, I had to say, okay, I'll even stipulate he's not trained. I don't know his background. He reacted in a manner consistent with training, which meant that I know I needed to do X to defeat him. So okay, he got lucky. I don't believe it to this day, but the lesson was taught to me. You don't really know if he's trained. Now, if he
Yeah.
has cauliflower ear, if he has certain things that indicate it, then I could say it. So what I switched to is
Mhm.
um I tried to do X to the suspect, and we'll talk about documentation more in another podcast because I think it's this whole thing's so important.
Mhm.
But what I switched to is, and my point is, through training, I can either recognize and then articulate trained behavior out of my bad guy that can that can clarify a threat to a person just watching a body cam that doesn't understand what they're looking at. I can clarify it in a manner where they go, "Holy cow, I can see that now."
Yeah.
And and I am confident. And it fighting is a language like any language. Um, I have I have our department Spanish, which I can tell you how to stand, where to put your hands. I can tell you to turn around. I can tell you hands up, all that, but I don't speak Spanish.
Mhm.
Um, you could learn department DTs, but you don't speak combatives,
Mhm.
combat. Whereas guys like us who have done this for so long, I'm fluent. So now I have a Spanish speaker on the department, and you have Chad who did the department Spanish in a certification class. And
Yeah.
I practice every so often. We're two different people. And the guy who speaks Spanish is fluent. Through training in any discipline, language, math, what I should eat,
Yeah.
how to exercise properly, through regular training in any discipline, academic and physical,
Yeah.
it makes my post event articulation better and more reasonable. And it also begins to separate me from everyone else who has an opinion. Because remember, a reasonable officer standard is a similarly trained officer at a similar time, in a similar place, with similar circumstances, would choose a similar option. So by being not normal, for lack of a better word, by having so many documented training hours, when I go to court, they just stipulate I'm a subject matter expert. I'm
Right.
not an average officer anymore.
Yeah.
So now my idea of reasonable is even a heavier weight than somebody who doesn't understand the case law or understand. Even in my early uses of force that I got challenged on, my first one that I got filleted on,
Yeah.
at the end of the day, I hadn't done anything criminal. I hadn't even violated policy. I didn't even get in trouble, but I got made to look stupid. So what I did was reasonable, but I
Mhm.
couldn't explain why it was reasonable. So I just got made to look foolish. It ultimately got cleaned up by another guy who actually understands those things who came after me. And then I said, man, I need to be like that. So then I changed my approach through consistent training, case law, policy, application of force, and then actually training how to apply force. And then now I'm melding all those.
Yeah.
And it makes me, it gives me a voice that carries weight. And it even carries more weight than a defense attorney
Mhm.
because he can't say he has what I have. And most of the time, a lot of the guys who oppose, a lot of the guys who will work for the plaintiff in use of force cases are former police administrators. And they're people who just promoted up through the department. So they had some kind of rank. So now they command a fee and they'll talk about why all the cops are wrong, which is what they did when they sat in their seat at the department. They didn't train then either. And they judged everybody. And now we're in court and they're doing the same thing. I'll generally fare very, very well against former chiefs,
Hmm.
former people like that, because I'll start to outline all the hours I have doing this.
Right.
Once I start talking about it, I'm fluent and they're not. They learned it from a department DT 40-hour class. And so they're saying, well, I was a DTI at my department. Yeah. And you're like 5 through 11 of your policing career.
Hmm.
I'm an advanced DTI who practices every week for
Yeah.
hours at a time, and it separates you. So what we preach, the physical goes right along with what we're talking about now.
It's funny that you said that because I wrote down something that I typically teach students, and that you were talking about. There's a quote which you kind of also talked about, which is when the local language is violence, you better be fluent, right? Essentially, that's what you're saying. So we recently had what we refer to as increment. An increment at our department is use of force training. We do it twice a year for our department, and this year we were doing active shooter scenarios. Super high stress, really valuable, so it's basically you get the call. It's like, Chad, you're on scene. There's gunshots inside. We have a call that there's someone inside with a gun. That is all you get, right? And so you see people doing this, right? So my opinion on that is it's a fourfold thing. You first have to know the knowledge of like what an active shooter is, what immediate defensive life is, and things like that. So you have to have the knowledge of certain situations. That's the first thing. The second thing that you must do as an officer, in my opinion, is visualize these things that could happen on the job. If you don't visually prepare yourself, we have tons of research from sports teams about visualization, about how important it is. I am It sounds strange, but I visualize the school shootings. I visualize what's going to happen behind a closed door. Like I'm constantly thinking about it. So my mind is prepared in some way. The next thing we have to do is literally train it. Like understand shooting, where you are, all of the nuances of it. And the last thing is putting in yourself into these scenarios. And so this is what we did. So we would take two officers, we open the door, they go in, they see someone who's down, they're applying a tourniquet, and all of a sudden shots are on top of them. Then they see the bad guy running. Now you're on me and you go. And it was amazing to see the different responses. Now, I would say, in my opinion, watching all of it for this increment, and I saw a lot of officers go through, I would say 80% reacted within a particular avenue,
Sure.
which was pretty good. There are always the ones that surprise the heck out of you, let me tell you. And it happens. And that's more training, obviously. And there are the fringe people that are likely misemployed for policing as well. I'm not saying that that has happened at my department necessarily, but that's something that we have to think about and talk about. So that can be a liability to yourself and a safety issue, obviously, when you're going through these scenarios. So I think knowledge, visualization, training, and scenarios are super important when we're going through use of force situations.
I agree. I agree, bro. All those things are so important and they go hand in hand. So, yeah, that's kind of our use of force model in the States, and it's very, very similar in Canada. That doesn't surprise me. And then we're going to talk about how to document it better in a future podcast. But for today, I really wanted to talk about that knowledge and then the marrying up of, hey, I'm doing all this physical. A lot of times when I'm doing PJJ, I'll say we'll be training a particular um, tactic. We'll be training a technique or something, and I'll say, what level of resistance is our bad guy in?
Yeah.
Okay, well, what are our other options here? Is this the only option? Now, what else would be an option here? And
Mhm.
you can start to interweave that into that. Um, does our bad guy have to attack us this way for them to get this response? No.
Right.
What's another thing they could do? Oh, they could do this, and this. Or maybe it is, yeah, they would have to be at least at this level of resistance. So we're constantly mixing that in. If you are a person who listens to our podcast and you're just pro police, especially if you're in the jiu-jitsu or MMA world and you train officers for free, or you offer some kind of discount, or you encourage them to train at your gym, continue to teach them the skills. And then what I would suggest is if they say, well, where am I at on use of force on this? Say, hey, that's a great question for your training division or your defensive tactics instructors at your agency. I don't want to say where you would be use of force wise, but what I want to do is teach you how to do this tactic. And then I want to give you homework, put it back on your students who are law enforcement. If you're not law enforcement, to go back and do the research and then say, hey, come back and tell me where you're at.
Hmm.
Come back and tell me what your agency would require the bad guys' resistance to be in this level, or what would they call it? And so it's super simple. If you're not law enforcement, you're still doing a huge service to our cops out there. If this is a specific law enforcement use of force question, don't answer it. Or if you have that defense tactics instructor in the room that he's a DTI, or
Yeah.
you have that guy who teaches DTs at the department as well as trains at your gym. Hey, go talk to John.
Yeah.
See what John has to say about this. Put it right back on your guys.
Yeah. So that was our use of force topic, talking about force models and things like that. We really appreciate you guys tuning in. Something else that we want to talk about is we are announcing that the No Zoo Lines rash guards, which we everyone had ordered, they're going to be landing or shipped out November 15th. 2025, and we should be shipping them out by the end of the month. And I have a prototype, and they turned out really good. So these are the no zoo
Oh,
lines rash guards that came in. We have the subdued line on the front. We've got the thin blue line on the sleeve, and then it doesn't do it justice, and then we have the line on the other side. So they're awesome, great material. They also have the rubber on the end so they don't ride up, and looking forward to it. So if you ordered one, they will be shipped out by the end of November. So Chad, I really appreciate your time. Thanks very much, my friend. And this is the No Zoo Lines podcast. So remember, lead, don't follow, and tune in to our website, which is the nozoolions.com website. We'll see you soon.
awesome.